Hi, my name is Mosh Hamedani, and I'm going to be your instructor over the next few hours. In this course, you're going to learn everything about Angular from the basic to the advanced topics, and you will build and deploy a real e-commerce application using Angular, Firebase, and the new awesome Bootstrap 4. Let me show you a demo of this application real quick. We're going to build an e-commerce application for an imaginary organic shop. So here on the homepage, we have master detail. We can select a category and see all the products in that category. We can add a product to our shopping cart, change the quantity, and the number of items in the shopping cart gets updated in real time. And here's our shopping cart. Again, here we can change the quantity for each item and the total price, as well as the total number of items in the shopping cart get updated immediately. If I open another tab and add another product to our shopping cart, what we have on the shopping cart tab gets updated automatically without me having to refresh the page. So all the data we show to the user is in sync everywhere in the application. And this is the beauty of a real-time application. Now let's check out. Here we have a shipping form and the summary of all the products in our shopping cart. And again, this summary gets updated as soon as I make a change to our shopping cart in another tab. Once we place this order, it will be visible to our admins. So I'm an admin user and I have this menu here, Manage Orders. Here we can see all the orders in the application. Other users will not see this page here. So here we have authentication and authorization. As an admin, I can also manage the products. So here we have all the CRUD operations. We can quickly search for a product. We can sort the data, resize the columns, or navigate to a different page. These are the patterns that you see in a lot of real-world applications. And in this course, you're going to learn how to implement these patterns in your applications. So, are you excited to learn Angular and build this application? Then let's jump in and get started. So, in case you're an absolute beginner with Angular, let me quickly explain in 2 minutes what Angular is and why you should learn it. Angular is a framework for building client applications in HTML, CSS, and either JavaScript or a language like TypeScript that compiles to JavaScript. But TypeScript is more common in the Angular community because Angular itself has been written with TypeScript. Now, if you have never worked with TypeScript before, don't worry at all. It's very easy and you're going to get familiar with it in this course. Now, one question that a lot of beginners have is, why do we need Angular? Can we not use plain old JavaScript or jQuery? We certainly can, and that's how a lot of web applications out there are built. But as our applications get more complex, vanilla JavaScript or jQuery code becomes hard to maintain. We need a way to properly structure our application. Sure, there are JavaScript patterns out there that help us with the structuring, but these patterns are hard to understand for a lot of beginners to JavaScript. Plus, a lot of applications built with vanilla JavaScript or jQuery are hard to test. And that's why, over the past few years, various frameworks have been built and evolved to make web application development easier. Angular is an example of such frameworks. It gives our applications a clean and loosely coupled structure that is easy to understand and easy to maintain. It also brings in a lot of utility code that we can reuse in various applications, especially when dealing with the user's navigation and the browser history. Plus, applications built with Angular are more testable, so we can easily write automated tests to test various parts of our application, as I will show you later in the course. So to answer this question, no, you don't need a framework like Angular to build client applications, but using Angular makes your life a lot easier. All right, now that you know what Angular is, let's take a look at the architecture of Angular applications. A lot of modern applications have at least two parts, a front end and a back end. The front end, also called the client, is the part that runs in the web browser, and this is what the user sees and interacts with. So it essentially includes the user interface or UI of an application. We use HTML, CSS, TypeScript, and Angular to build the front end. The backend sits on a web server or multiple web servers in the cloud and is responsible for storing the data and doing any kind of processing. Our front end or the client app talks to the backend to get or save the data. One of the questions that a lot of beginners ask me is, Mosh, how do I save my data in Angular? Well, you don't. In most cases, you don't save the data on the client because it can easily disappear as the user clears the browser data or moves to a different computer. That's why we store the data on the server. So here we often have one or more databases, as well as a bunch of HTTP services or APIs to make this data available to the clients. In case you don't know, API stands for Application Programming Interface. Now, if you put this fancy name aside, these HTTP services or APIs are essentially endpoints that are accessible via the HTTP protocol. So we can call them using simple HTTP requests to get or to save the data. If that's too much technical jargon here, let me give you a metaphor. Think of a port where ships load or unload. These are points to get loads in and out of a town, right? Now imagine these ports are HTTP endpoints, ships are HTTP requests, and loads are data. So just like we can send a ship to a port to get some load and bring to us, a client app sends an HTTP request to an endpoint to get some data. So this is how the big picture works. Our web applications have a front end and a back end. On the back end, we have one or more databases and APIs that make the data available to the clients. For a large application around a complex domain, this is where we implement the business logic of the application, like calculating the tax and shipping cost based on various parameters. The front end or the client, on the other hand, is all about the presentation. So here we have our HTML templates, as well as the presentation logic of our application. This logic is all about displaying data and responding to user actions, like what should happen when the user clicks on a button or navigates away from a page. These are examples of the presentation logic, or the logic that is all about the presentation aspect of an application. Now, in terms of the implementation, building the backend requires familiarity with other languages and frameworks, and that's completely outside the scope of building client apps with Angular. So as an Angular or a front-end developer, you don't have to worry about this. This is the job of a backend developer or a full-stack developer who knows both the front end and the backend. So for the purpose of this course, we're going to focus on the front end. And if you want to learn about the backend development, you can always pick up a course later down the road. But for now, let's just focus on one thing and do it well. All right, in this lecture, I'm going to show you how to set up your development environment and create your first Angular project. So the first thing you need to install is the latest version of Node. In case you have never worked with Node before, it's basically a runtime environment for executing JavaScript code outside the browser. In this course, we're not going to work with Node, but Node provides some tools that we need to build Angular projects. So if you haven't installed Node, head over to nodejs.org. On this page, you can see the latest version of Node for your operating system. So here, the latest stable version is 6.11, and the latest version is version 8. Now, this latest version has more features, but it's not quite stable yet. So go ahead and install the latest stable version. When you do that, open up the terminal on Mac or command prompt on Windows and type node --version. So you can see on my machine, I'm running Node version 6.10. The minimum version required for building Angular applications is version 6.9. Once you have Node, then we're going to use a tool called Node Package Manager, or NPM, to install third-party libraries. One of those libraries we're going to install in this lecture is Angular CLI, which stands for Command Line Interface. So it's a command line tool that we use to create a new Angular project or generate some boilerplate code, as well as create deployable packages. So once again, in the terminal, we run npm install -g, which stands for global, and finally the name of the package, which is @angular/CLI. If you don't put -g here, Angular CLI will be installed only in the current folder, and it's not going to be accessible anywhere else. Now, if you're on Mac, you need to put sudo at the beginning of this command to execute it as an administrator. All right, next we need to enter our password. And now this process is going to take a little while. All right, beautiful. We installed Angular CLI. Now to ensure that the installation was successful, we can type ng --version. So you can see I'm running Angular CLI version 1.1.0. And below that, you can see the version of Node on my machine. Once again, it's 6.10. So with Angular CLI in place, now we can create a new Angular project. So we type ng new, and let's call this project hello-world. So this generates a bunch of files and folders, and then it's going to use npm to download the third-party libraries. All right, our project is successfully created. Now to start coding, we need a code editor. The editor I'm going to use in this course is Visual Studio Code or VS Code. It's a beautiful cross-platform lightweight editor that you can download at code.visualstudio.com. If you don't like this editor, feel free to use any editors that you prefer. You can use Sublime, you can use Atom, or any other editors. Now, if you're going to use VS Code, I want you to add it to the path so you can easily open it from the terminal. So here, if you're using Mac, press Shift, Command, and P. Or if you're using Windows, press Shift, Control, and P. This opens up the command palette. Now here type code. Look at this command here. Install code command in path. With this, we can go to the terminal. In the folder where we created a new project, Hello World, simply type code period. So this opens up VS Code pointing to the current folder. Now in the next lecture, we're going to look at this structure. You're going to learn what files and folders we have here. But before we get there, let's make sure that this application works. So back in the terminal, once again, we use Angular CLI to load our application in a web server. So we type ng space serve. So now we have a live development server listening on localhost port 4200, and Angular CLI also compiled our application. It generated bundles for JavaScript and CSS files. So we can open up Chrome and head over to localhost port 4200. Beautiful. This is our first Angular app. Next, we're going to look at the structure of our new Angular project. All right, now let's see what files and folders we have in this new project. So the first folder we have here is E2E, which stands for end-to-end. And this is where we write end-to-end tests for our application. If you have not worked with end-to-end tests, these are basically automated tests that simulate a real user. So we can write code to launch our browser, navigate to the homepage of our application, click a few links here and there, fill out a form, click a button, and then assert that there is something on the page. This is an example of an end-to-end test. Now that's beyond the scope of this course, so we don't have to worry about it yet. Below that, we have Node modules. And this is where we store all the third-party libraries that our application may depend upon. Now this folder is purely for development. So when we compile our application, parts of these third-party libraries are put in a bundle and deployed with our application. So we're not going to deploy this Node modules folder to a server. You're going to see this later in the course. Below that, we have the source folder. And this is where we have the actual source code of our application. So we have this app folder here, and inside this folder, we have a module and a component. So every application has at least one module and one component. You're going to get familiar with these components and modules very soon. Below that, we have this assets folder where you store the static assets of our application. So if you have any image files, any text files, any icons, all of these go here. Below that, we have this environments folder. And this is where we store configuration settings for different environments. So we have one file for the production environment and the other for the development environment. Now, the other files we have in the source folder are favorite icon, which is the icon displayed in the browser. We have index.html, which is a very simple HTML file that contains our Angular application. So note that here we don't have any references to a script or a style sheet. These references will be dynamically inserted into this page, as I will show you later in the course. Now, below that, we have this main file, which is a TypeScript file. And this is basically the starting point of our application. So in a lot of programming languages, we have this concept of the main method, which is the starting point of a program. We have the same concept in our Angular applications. So all we're doing here is bootstrapping the main module of our application, which is in this case, app module. So Angular loads this module and everything else starts from there. We have this polyfills file, which basically imports some scripts that are required for running Angular, because the Angular framework uses features of JavaScript that are not available in the current version of JavaScript supported by most browsers out there. So these polyfills fill the gap between the features of JavaScript that Angular needs and the features supported by the current browsers. Below that, we have styles.css, and this is where we add the global styles for our application. And also each page or each component can have its own styles, as you will see later in the course. Below that, we have test.ts, which is basically used for setting up our testing environment. Again, for now, we don't have to worry about this. Now, outside the source folder, we have a configuration file for Angular CLI. It's pretty standard configuration. You don't have to worry about it for the most part. Below that, we have editor config. So if you're working in a team environment, you want to make sure that all developers in the team use the same settings in their editors. So this is where you store these settings. We have this git ignore file, which is basically for excluding certain files and folders from your Git repository. If you have not worked with Git, don't worry. It's not something that you need to know in order to build applications with Angular. It's basically a tool for managing and versioning your source code. Now below that, we have karma.config.js, which is a configuration file for Karma, which is a test runner for JavaScript code. Again, we're not going to worry about running tests at this stage. Now below that, we have an important file, package.json. Now this is a standard file that every Node project has. Apart from a bunch of basic settings here, like the name and version of your application, we have this setting here, dependencies, which determines the libraries that your application is dependent upon. So here you can see we have 9 references to Angular libraries. All these libraries start with @Angular, and after that we have the name of the library. So the first library here is for animations. If you're not going to use animations in your application, you can delete this here. So in the future, as we use third-party libraries, you will see them listed here under the dependencies. Now below that, we also have another setting or another key called dev dependencies. And these are the libraries that we need in order to develop this application. So we don't need these to run our application on a production server. These are purely for a developer machine. So here we have a reference to Angular CLI, which you're already familiar with. We also have a few other references to Karma, which is again a test runner for JavaScript code. Now below this package.json, we have protractor.config.js, which is basically a tool for running end-to-end tests for Angular. Again, we're not going to worry about it. Now, another file here is tsconfig, which has a bunch of settings for your TypeScript compiler. So your TypeScript compiler looks at these settings, And based on these settings, it's going to compile your TypeScript code into JavaScript that browsers can understand. Again, for the most part, you don't have to change any of this here. Just be aware that if in the future, in a complex project, you need to change your TypeScript compiler settings, this is where you need to apply your changes. And finally, we have tslint.json, which includes a number of settings for tslint. In case you don't know, tslint is a static analysis tool for TypeScript code. So it checks your TypeScript code for readability, maintainability, and functionality errors. So this is the basic structure of an Angular project. All right, now let's make a tiny change to this application. So in the app folder, open up app.component.ts. Now, if you have never worked with TypeScript before, don't worry about this code. As we go through the course, I'm going to break this up for you so you will know exactly what is happening here. So all I want you to do here is to change this string from app to Angular app. Now save the file. Back in the terminal, look at this message, Webpack compiling. So Angular CLI uses a tool called Webpack, which is a build automation tool. It gets all our scripts and style sheets, combines them, puts them in a bundle, and then minifies that bundle. And this is for optimization. So here you can see we have a few bundles like polyfills, which includes all the scripts to fill the gap between the version of JavaScript that Angular needs and the version of JavaScript supported by most browsers out there. We have main bundle, which is all the source code of our application. We have styles bundle, which includes all our style sheets. And note that here style sheets are actually stored in a JavaScript bundle. You're going to see that in a second. We also have this vendor bundle, which includes all the third-party libraries. Now, at the time of recording this video, unfortunately, Angular CLI does not allow you to customize the name of these bundles or add additional bundles. But there is a discussion going on GitHub. Chances are this may change in the future. Now, that aside, what I want you to note here is that whenever you change one of your files, whether that file being a style sheet, a TypeScript file, or an HTML file, Webpack automatically recompiles your application and refreshes your bundles. So now here at the bottom, you can see Webpack compiled successfully. Now, if you go back to the browser, look, without me even refreshing this page, now we have the new title, Welcome to Angular app. So this is a feature of Webpack called hot module replacement or hot module reloading. So whenever one of the source files is modified, Webpack automatically refreshes your browser. Now let's right click on this page and go to View Page Source. On the bottom of this page, look at these script tags. So all the bundles that Webpack generated, it also injected them into our index.html. So just to refresh your memory, here in index.html, look, we don't have any references to a style sheet or a script file. So this is something that happens at runtime. So Webpack automatically injects these scripts into our index.html. Now let's take a look at this styles.bundle.js. So basically what we have here is some JavaScript, and in the middle of this JavaScript code, you can find the styles used in your application. Now how this works is a little bit complicated, so don't worry about it for now. What I want you to know is that all your style sheets are compiled into a JavaScript bundle. One question that often comes up is what's the difference between AngularJS, Angular 2, and Angular 4? And how did we jump from Angular 2 to Angular 4? Well, AngularJS was introduced in 2010 as a JavaScript framework for building client applications. Soon it gained popularity, and Angular team started adding new features to the core. But the framework was not designed with the needs of today's applications in mind. Plus, it was overly complex. So Angular team decided to rewrite the original framework using TypeScript, and as a result, Angular 2 came out in mid-2016. This new version is entirely different from Angular 1 to the extent that you can think of it as a completely different framework. Now, this made a lot of developers unhappy because they had a lot of applications built with Angular 1 with each application over a few thousand lines of code that had to be rewritten. But overall, I personally like the direction that the Angular team took and how they rebuilt Angular with TypeScript. This is a much better framework, it's a lot cleaner, and it's a lot easier to understand and to work with. Now, after a few minor upgrades to Angular 2, something strange happened. We were up to Angular 2.3, and then all of a sudden, Angular 4 came out. So a lot of developers, including myself, wondered what happened to Angular 3. We thought we missed something really big here. But unlike Angular 2, Angular 4 was not a new framework with a lot of breaking changes. In fact, it wasn't even a major upgrade. So let me explain what happened. Angular consists of a few different libraries that are distributed as separate node packages via NPM. For example, we have the core library that we use in every application. We have Angular compiler. We have Angular HTTP for calling HTTP services. We have Angular router for adding navigation to applications and a few other libraries. Now, all these libraries were versioned the same except the router library. So in order to align these versions and avoid confusion in the future, Angular team decided to go straight to Angular version 4. So in a sense, Angular 4 is not a major upgrade to Angular 2, and you can think of it as Angular 2.4, as simple as that. Now, after all this confusion in the community about Angular versions, the team decided to drop the version suffix and simply call the framework Angular. So now we have two kinds of Angular. We have AngularJS, which is the first generation of Angular written in JavaScript, and it's going to die sooner or later. And we also have Angular, which refers to Angular 2 or later. In our discussions, in our articles, and whenever we want to talk about Angular 2 or later, we should really use the word Angular. Like, I'm an Angular developer, instead of I'm an Angular 2 developer, or I'm an Angular 4 developer. See, it's really weird. We should use versions only when we need to talk about a specific release. For example, when we want to upgrade Angular 4 to Angular 5, then everybody knows what is the scope of this upgrade and what are the potential breaking changes that can impact an application. So this is all about Angular version history. All right, now let me quickly give you an overview of how I have structured this course and how you can get the most out of it in the shortest possible time. So in this course, we have 3 parts: Essentials, Advanced Topics, and the final project. We're going to start the essential part with an introduction to TypeScript and object-oriented programming. This will prepare you to build Angular applications. So then we'll look at Angular fundamentals, displaying data and handling events, components, directives, template-driven forms, reactive forms, consuming HTTP services, routing and navigation, authentication and authorization, deployment, and building real-time applications with Firebase. So these are the essentials that you will use frequently in real-world applications. Then we get into the territory of the advanced topics. And by advanced, I don't mean complicated, I mean anything that is beyond the basics. So in this part of the course, I will cover animations, Angular material, Redux architecture, unit testing, and integration testing. And over the last part, we'll build that e-commerce application that I showed you at the beginning of the course. This part also includes a few sections, and in each section, we'll build one module of functionality in this application. So here we have sections like product management, shopping cart, checkout, and so on. Now, I understand that you might be busy and not have enough time to watch the entire course, and that's perfectly fine. So I'm going to give you a shortcut that allows you to get the most out of the course within the shortest possible time. Start with the essentials. Watch all these sections in sequence, but feel free to skip the section called reactive forms because we're not going to use the materials in this section in our final project. Also, you can skip consuming HTTP services as well as authentication and authorization. You need to watch these sections if you want to build a backend for your application using frameworks such as ASP.NET, Express, Django, and so on. But this e-commerce application we'll build in this course doesn't have a custom-built backend. We use Firebase as the backend, so things are a little bit different here. If this sounds confusing to you, don't worry, I will clarify it in the section about Firebase. So here's my suggestion to you. Watch these sections in the essential parts in sequence, and then move to the final project part. I want you to build this application because that's where you will see all these moving parts coming together. Plus, those sections include tons and tons of tips and techniques that I've shared with you, and these are the things I have learned over the past 17 years of working in the industry as a professional software developer. They really change your thinking about programming and software engineering. I worked really hard for these sections and I want you to watch them. Once you finish the project, then you will have a good understanding of the big picture. Then you can come back and learn about the other sections in the course in isolation, depending on your needs. For example, if you want to learn how to add animations to your applications, you can simply go watch the animation section. Or if you want to learn about reactive forms, you can just go back to that section. So focus on the absolute essentials and then move to the final project. Now, before going any further, I want us to make a promise to each other. Here's my promise to you. I want to promise you that I will deliver to you the very best possible course for learning Angular. Now, I want you to make me a promise. I know you might be busy, but I want you to watch the essential parts of the course and build this e-commerce application. I worked really hard on these materials, and I believe if you watch these sections and build the final application, you will master Angular and become a better developer. All it takes is that you make that promise. And if you want to support me for my hard work, I would very much appreciate it if you take a minute and leave a review for my course and also share the link with others. Thank you, and now let's continue.